Self-professed nonpartisan journalist Piers Morgan hosted his latest pro-Trump, anti-Kamala, anti-Democratic panel in which liberal streamer Destiny was the only pro-Kamala, pro-Democratic guest. And yet, despite being outnumbered 4-1, Destiny repeatedly, ruthlessly debunked MAGA talking points, even when they came from Piers himself. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several clips to talk about in this video. As you know, I have my beef with Piers Morgan. I think when it comes to foreign policy, he knows how to be a credible, nonpartisan journalist capable of asking tough questions, no matter who he's talking to, be it Cenk Uygur or Rabbi Shmuley. But when it comes to U.S. politics, even though he says he's a nonpartisan journalist with no particular bias, that is clearly not the case. His panels on U.S. politics are lopsided in configuration. It usually has one pro-Democratic candidate or panelist up against 2 to 3 to 4, as is the case here, anti-Democratic candidates. Either people are outspokenly pro-Trump or just centrists who are critical of one side in particular. And usually Piers jumps in on the action as well, almost always in favor of Trump. Unfortunately, he made the mistake of inviting on liberal streamer Destiny, who, like Mehdi Hasan, is more than capable of soloing a gauntlet of quiet or shy Trump supporters. And so I want to play a couple of clips with you, starting with this one. It's chronologically the one that comes the latest of the clips I have, but in many ways it's the most entertaining because Destiny debunks MAGA talking points from Piers Morgan himself, as well as one of the pro-Trump, openly MAGA guests. And so it's just a great exchange.
Because Trump, for all the attempts to try and frame him as Putin's great buddy and so on, he's unpredictable. And I think on the world stage, I quite like that unpredictability. It seemed to keep them all in their boxes, whether it was Kim Jong-un, President Xi, Putin, Ayatollah Khomeini. They all kept in their boxes pretty much for the 4 years.
They literally, what are we talking about? Iran literally attacked Saudi Arabia under Trump.
We weren't in war.
Kim Jong-un literally, that's great that you have a cute little phrase of in war, but they were attacking the country with bombs, okay? I don't know what you would call that. Whatever you would call that is fine. That's that's congratulations, okay? Kim was still testing missiles, okay? That didn't stop under Donald Trump. The appeasements that he was making around the world towards people wasn't moving us towards peace. It was moving us towards this false sense of security because Trump was too stupid or too lazy to actually deal with any of the issues that were going on around the world. This idea that he somehow gets credit for foreign policy because he kicked the can down the road on everything, that he invited the Taliban to Doha to make an agreement cutting out the Afghanistan government, that he abandoned allies in Syria while also bombing a Syrian airport. We say, oh, Trump was the president of peace when he was making deals in the Middle East, cutting out the Palestinians, when he was having photo ops with people like Kim. This idea that Trump was some great master of foreign policy is hilarious. Also, this idea that
So he's about to tear into the blonde pro-Trump guest. I think her name is Emily. Emily Saves America or something like that. But let's talk about what he first said, what Destiny said with respect to Piers, because again, this is a myth. This is a mythologized, fictional Trump, that Trump was the peacemaker, Trump was the dove. Mehdi Hasan, I mentioned him earlier, has a good 5-minute debunk on his news network Zateo's YouTube channel. I recommend that you check it out. If we didn't have other clips to get to in terms of this, I would probably play it and unpack it as well. But he goes into the many examples of Donald Trump being quite hawkish in terms of both rhetoric and, in fact, deed. And Destiny said it right. A lot of the stuff just kicked the can down the road, like the chickens came home to roost later on under a subsequent administration. Emily, of course, mentions, well, we weren't in war. Well, we're actually in one fewer war. We're in one less war under President Biden because, unlike Donald Trump, President Biden actually got us out of Afghanistan, even though Trump promised to do it for 4 years. And Trump certainly set the stage, as Destiny alludes, for a disastrous deal with the Taliban, which set the circumstances for a very chaotic withdrawal that Trump himself didn't have the courage or the integrity to see through, which is why he kicked the can down the road, set the stage in his last year, and President Biden was left to clean up the mess. So really good that we debunk this lie that Donald Trump was a dove, that Donald Trump was anti-war. He actually increased the number of drone strikes and provocative actions taken against foreign belligerents. So it's just simply not true. And again, remember, the United States is in one less war now under Biden-Harris than we were under Trump Pence, because again, we got out of Afghanistan under Biden. Now let's get back to what Destiny is about to say to Emily Saves America.
We should be talking policy in the United States instead of antics. I agree 1,000,000,000%. It's actually a huge problem that I have. Kamala Harris is significantly to the left of me on a lot of economic issues. We can't talk about that because the conservatives have abandoned policy since 2016. They just want to talk about whatever crazy antics Trump is up to. And the idea of making fun of Kamala Harris being unable to string together like a coherent sentence when Donald Trump gave a 3-minute rambling answer to what policy would you support to help children and to help childcare for struggling families is hilarious. Donald Trump literally can't speak. He has never put together a coherent policy thought.
That's why he does 3-hour-long interviews every day with the biggest people in the country, because he can't talk. Got it.
You should try actually watching one and listening to the words that he's saying instead of getting so excited that Donald Trump is speaking.
I watch every single one.
Interview he's done. Really, give me one coherent policy position that Trump has expanded on in the last 2 months.
So out of Theo
Exactly,
Vaughn,
that's
Lex
it.
Friedman,
That's it. Exactly.
and he didn't have.
So again, she can't give one. Instead, she hesitates and she's like, "Say words. You want policies from this person, from that person? Just say the policy." He didn't say from Theo Vaughn or Lex Friedman. He said just give a policy position. And Emily Saves America can't do that because, of course, it is true. Again, like the myth of a dovish Trump, when in fact he was quite hawkish. It's the same thing with respect to Donald Trump on policy. Donald Trump is an idiot who has never understood policy particularly well, which is why so many of his former top Trump officials in the Trump administration have come out and said, Donald Trump, we had to condense the presidential daily brief because he wouldn't read it. He didn't want to learn policy. He went off vibes and tweets and Fox propagandists and social media and things like that. Donald Trump has never, ever, ever been a policy wonk. And so any allusion to the contrary is just ridiculous and should be ruthlessly debunked, as Destiny did there. Good for him. As a matter of fact, I want to remind you, because this clip is so funny, the clip he's referring to was when Donald Trump was asked an unscripted question. He was off prompter. It was a Q&A session at the Economic Club of New York about how he would reduce the cost of childcare. This was his answer.
If you win in November, can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. You know, I was somebody, we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that, because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare, that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits with.
I know this felt like it went on for an hour, but it was actually only 1 minute, and we're basically halfway there. And I really don't want to torture you or myself with the remaining minute. I'm sure you've seen this viral clip. But again, he didn't answer the question at all. As a matter of fact, he was roasted relentlessly. As a matter of fact, by the person who asked the question. We should probably do a video about that. She went on the media, made the media rounds addressing this virally stupid moment from Donald Trump. And she said that he was absolutely disqualified as a consequence of being unable to answer this sort of question. That's how embarrassing it was. Donald Trump was not a dove, and Donald Trump cannot speak to policy. He is a legitimately stupid man who deserves nothing but your contempt, as do people who pretend that he is anything but and is actually a master of policy. Let's go on to the next clip, another exchange between Destiny and the MAGA panel.
And I just think it's funny that the morally superior liberals are so quick to be like, Trump's a felon, he's a bad guy, and all these things. Yeah, and they're like, no, felons should be able to vote and do all these things. They're like, unless it's Donald Trump. But George Floyd was apparently an amazing person, so.
Well, George Floyd was brutally murdered by a police officer who was convicted of brutally murdering him. And unfortunately, we saw it all on a cell phone. Otherwise, it would have probably never been reported. I can see you shaking your head there, Destiny. you want to
yeah,
say
this
something?
happens all the time. Whenever you debate conservatives, I mean, it's happened here. I've seen it happen in other places. It'll be like, here's the standards for, Republican lawmakers. And then they'll point to like people on Twitter on the other side. Like, well, what about that person? Well, I don't remember voting for George Floyd for president or nominating him for president. The idea that that's your basis of comparison, like, oh, you've got a problem with Donald Trump. Well, what about George Floyd? It's just such a hilariously telling, I think, example.
Well, let me ask you a difficult question.
Well, he was also a criminal that overdosed, but that's another situation.
That still doesn't get him any closer to being nominated for president of the Democratic Party. I don't understand what the comparison is for.
It's just funny to have different standards. You're like, this is fine, but this isn't fine. That's the whole point of that. You don't need to read that deeply into it. It's not that big of a deal.
It's funny to have different. Do you have different standards for different people? Isn't that the point, to have different standards for different people? Like,
yeah.
The point is,
I know. Once again, that's a joke. It goes far over
George Floyd. They
liberals'
put him.
I don't know if she knows what a joke is. I guess it's called Emily Saves America for a reason, not Emily Saves Comedy, because she doesn't know what a joke is. So what she was suggesting is that there was some equivalence there, that basically people should hold George Floyd, murder victim and felon, to the same standard as Donald Trump, presidential candidate, former president, potential future president, and felon. That because they were both felons, you hold them to the same standard, even though one was a murder victim, not seeking high office, who was killed by cops, and another who is not a murder victim and is seeking the highest office in the land. So what Emily, like many other MAGA Republicans, are just too stupid to understand is that with great power comes great responsibility. I'm sure she and other MAGA Republicans might understand Spider-Man, right? So that's a line from Uncle Ben. With great power comes great responsibility. And that's a notion that's actually, I would argue, at least on paper, very American. We at least pay lip service to this idea that, be it police, teachers, politicians, presidents, if you polled 10 Americans, I imagine 80% of them or more, should be 100%, but 80% of them would say, yeah, the more power you have, the more responsibility you have to wield that power responsibly, and you should be held to higher standards. That's why we hold teachers who are influential, to be sure, but not particularly powerful, but we hold them to higher standards than just the average private citizen. Again, same with cops and so on and so forth. That's why morally superior liberals hold Donald Trump and should hold any presidential candidate, including Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Republican or Democrat, shouldn't matter. We should hold them all to the same standard. Presidential candidates should be held to really, 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 really high standards because they're seeking the highest and most powerful office in the world. And with great power comes great responsibility. The more power you have, the more responsibility you have. But MAGA Republicans, people who are Trump supporters in the age of Trump, have totally jettisoned that very basic, very understandable principle that in any other context they would endorse. You take Trump out of the equation in a post-Trump or pre-Trump world, they would totally embrace it, even for Republicans, even if they were just regular Republicans. If you ask Republicans in the Mitt Romney era, say, hey, Mitt Romney's a governor. He's trying to become president. He should be held to a higher standard than the average person, right? I would venture to guess that most Republicans, most Romney supporters would have been like, of course. That's why he's seeking the highest office in the land. We have to do that. With great power comes great responsibility. Then along comes Trump, the total antithesis of the party of personal accountability. And nothing is Donald Trump's fault. He's perfect. He's flawless. And if you criticize this perfect, flawless person, well, that's sacrilege. That's heresy, and that's on you. And for that matter, how dare you try to hold Donald Trump to a particular standard when there are people out there who are felons that you're not upset about? How can you possibly be upset about the murder of George Floyd and criticize Donald Trump when they're both felons? What a stupid, unprincipled notion that is. What a stupid, but that goes to show how MAGA Republicans, they can only function in a universe in which Democrats and people in the Democratic coalition and people that the Democratic coalition feels any sort of sympathy or compassion for, like a murder victim, like George Floyd, all of them have to be held to the much higher standard than anybody on the Republican side. It is literally the MAGA Republican thought process that you hold everybody to a higher standard than Trump and MAGA Republicans. She thinks that George Floyd should be held to a higher standard than the leader of her party and the former president of the United States and potential future president of the United States. It's so pathetically gross. And that's what Destiny was talking about in that particular clip. He's calling it out, saying we should hold elected officials, Democrat or Republican, to a higher standard, given that they represent us and they wield state power, and presidents even higher still, than to just anybody. I think a Democratic, for the record, just demonstrating how consistent I am in my beliefs, I think as an unapologetic Democrat that a Democratic politician should be held to a higher standard than a conservative private citizen. Even though I'm more inclined to agree with the Democratic politician because one is in power and the other one isn't, the one in power, regardless of our political sympathies being on the same page, should be held to a higher standard. This is a notion that eludes MAGA Republicans in the age of Trump. They can't fathom it. And that is why they deserve nothing but your contempt, particularly when they are conservative influencers like this. There's no universe in which they don't get this outside of Trump. Imagine how a MAGA Republican influencer would react if you suggested that an everyday conservative citizen should be held to a higher standard or as high of a standard as a Democratic politician. They'd be like, no, of course not. They get it. They get it in any other context other than Trump. And that's how you know it's a cult. You should definitely check out this full episode in its entirety, many spicy moments all the way around, which is what you typically get when you have Piers Morgan and Destiny on the same panel. But in the meantime, you let me know what you think in the comments.